As Carissa said, the confessional reader is supposed to talk about a first sexual experience, and I will, but first I want to introduce a theory. I'm calling this the theory of multiple virginities. I believe that virginity comes in many forms, as does its loss. I know, the relevant act is the technical penetration of a body orifice by a body part of somebody else, but for many of us, that is not the sexiest of sexual firsts. For me, many other, more delicious experiences introduced me to the pleasures of the body, including, for example, the awakening of desire, the discovery of orgasm, the first voluntary sex, and the first sex that took me to another world that seemed holy. You with me so far? Okay, my story is about the loss of virginities in 5 short chapters. Virginity number 1, excitement. I learned all about desire with my first boyfriend, Steve, when I was 14. Steve was a great boyfriend because he was really nice and he liked me and all, but I especially liked that he was taller and bigger than I was, which had been impossible to find before that age. I liked to make out with him standing up because I could tilt back my head and feel his strong arms around me. That was about the same time we discovered in biology class that the skin is the largest human organ. My skin was a light around him. I felt directly connected to his skin. We were like magnets. We were like the love bugs that were omnipresent on the highways, like the fusing of metals into steel. We were compelled to be in direct physical contact whenever we were together, which must have been annoying as shit to people outside our little circle of people. This one time we had his house to ourselves. We had been swimming and we were still wearing wet bathing suits and t-shirts. We lay in his twin bed, first with him on top of me, and then with me on top of him, and then switching again. We kissed and rubbed and rolled and rubbed against each other for so long that the friction wore our skin raw. His erection fascinated me, and I tried to map the whole shape of his penis with my belly and pubic bone. I did not, however, open my legs. I didn't take his penis into my hand, or into anything else. We never even talked about taking off our clothes. What's thrilling to remember is that the excitement was enough. Our great mutual pleasure was satisfying. He might have felt a little differently about the ejaculation urge, but as far as I knew, there was no goal or destination. The only remotely negative aspect of that day was the embarrassing, wet, bathing suit-shaped spots on our t-shirts afterwards. Virginity number 2, penetration. The summer after junior high, I worked as a car hop at a root beer drive-in, the kind where I hooked a tray onto someone's car and then brought them burgers and root beer floats. My tiny tips added up and funded fabric for nice clothes to wear in high school. Walking home from my first day of high school, I stopped by the apartment of Dave, a 19-year-old folk singer who had been a regular at the drive-in. At a recent gig, he had played Ruby, Don't Take Your Love to Town, which is about a veteran who's crippled in the war and worries that he can't satisfy his woman, which had made me cry. I felt privileged to know that he sang it for his friend Ted, who had come home from Vietnam in a wheelchair. That afternoon after school, I thought I looked pretty in the dress I'd made for the first day, and I wanted Dave to see it. I had sewn shiny red and gray flowered fabric into a short A-line dress with big patch pockets. When I knocked on Dave's apartment door, he and Ted were sitting around the shabby living room smoking pot and drinking. I knew Ted, too, from the drive-in, but I only had eyes for Dave. Dave had poetic eyes and long dark hair. When offered the joint, I said, "No thanks, I'm not old enough." Dave suggested we have sex, which I similarly turned down because I wasn't old enough for that either. I couldn't look directly at him when I said, "Someday when I'm ready, I'd like to be with you." After a little while, he said, "Do you want to just make out?" I I followed him into the bedroom, where his rumpled bedclothes smelled stale. The thought crossed my mind that he had kissed other girls here, but I was really happy to be the one he was kissing now, until he pinned me down with his forearm hard across my chest, yanked my new dress up and my underpants aside so he could enter me fast. I hadn't known anything could hurt like that. The burning and tearing, the feeling of being wounded so far inside. When the hurting movement kept going, I asked him how much longer it would be. He turned his head away, disgusted with me. I thought, this is what sex is like. Something must be really wrong with me that I don't like it. I could feel my shiny dress bunching up around my waist. I focused all my will on not crying so I wouldn't annoy him anymore. When he finally stopped and climbed off, I slid up on the bed to get away from the wet mess under me. I pulled down my dress and tried to smooth out the wrinkles. It had taken careful, low-temperature ironing to set the wide hem because the fabric was a new synthetic material. I tried not to look at the dirty sheet where pink and red smeared a dark patch. My underwear stuck to me when I stood up, and I was glad my dress's colors would hide any stains. Walking home, I stayed in the alleys and buried my underpants in someone's garbage can. I couldn't show my face to Dave again. Instead, I redoubled my sewing efforts. The comfort of following a patterned steps and the pleasure of pinning and cutting new material helped me stop thinking about how ashamed I felt. In pictures from that year of high school, I practically glow with success and pride. My clothes look great. Virginity number 3. It gets better. Orgasm. Like many girls, I didn't really know what an orgasm was long after I knew about boys' ejaculations. But there was another guy in his 20s, another Steve actually, who frequented the Root Beer Drive-In and introduced me to cool songs on the jukebox in the tiny, cruddy dining room. He hung around to talk when business was slow. His mustache seemed ironic, and I felt smart around him. Steve drove a blue VW Bug with the front trunk panels, honest to God, painted with huge flowers and an 8-track player in the glove box. I can still smell that car. Right away, he told me that he would not have intercourse with me ever, which was kind of a relief. We did sometimes make out in his car, though, and he taught me important lessons. The first one was about fellatio. I'd never done it before, but I really liked him, and I started in, pumping away. He taught me to slow down. There's no hurry, he said, take your time. That was a lesson with what you might call lasting value. In the second lesson, he touched me in a way I'd never thought of, rubbing gently back and forth across what I now know is my clitoris. His touch was a slippery, persistent surprise and went on way longer than I expected. Most of my previous experience with boys touching me had involved grabby, desperate, I don't know how long she's going to let me, breast pawings. He asked me, do you feel anything? Well, yeah, it was extremely pleasant. But I didn't feel anything else. He suggested I experiment at home, which is an excellent idea. So in my little light blue room with the cutout pictures of go-go girls dancing on the walls, I did what he had done, and it felt just as good. I kept at it for a while, thinking about him doing it to me, and I felt a little something different, just a little strange sensation. So the next time I saw him, I asked, is an orgasm a little twinge, like a little electricity? He said, I think if the word little is involved, it's not the real thing. But it might be the beginning. Let's find out. So we did. And I discovered an astounding human capacity. How was it everyone didn't know about this? I'm still amazed by the power of so simple and basic and glorious a thing. Steve was in complete control of our relationship, and he did not abuse it. He titrated every milliliter of our contact. He was kind, but not seductive in the manipulative sense. On my 17th birthday, he took me to 2 movies that I got to pick, and I remember one of them was Love Story, and to Lums for food in between. It was a high-water mark date. Somehow he kept me from falling in love with him, for which I am grateful. But I'm more grateful for the lessons in lovemaking and for transforming my sad, shameful sense of sex into a source of pleasure. Virginity number 4, choices. By the time I left high school, I was ready to have sex with my boyfriend, Richard. I struggled through the gauntlet required back then to get birth control, but it was worth it. And I was very pleased to discover that sex didn't hurt. We had many lovely times on my narrow dorm bed. Numbers-wise, I figure college mattresses must be the site of more coitus than any other single furnishing in the entire world. Truthfully, I don't remember the first time with Richard, even though I know it should matter. But what does matter is that together we chose to be a sexual couple. Our lovemaking relationship lasted for a relatively long time, so I remember it in softer focus, in montages of fuzzy mornings in my dorm bed and disconcerting wave action on his waterbed.
Oh.
I remember his body as beautiful, spare and chiseled, and that he looked directly into my eyes. I felt open-minded and grown up enough to live with him one summer. We were in a new era, full of utopian possibilities and love. We lugged his waterbed up the outside wooden stairs and filled it with a hose. I went to my 2 jobs all summer, always pushing my big green Chevy named Norman down a little hill and popping the clutch to start the engine. I sewed curtains to match our bedspread. Richard was a mechanic and couldn't find a regular job. Although I never felt comfortable sleeping on the waterbed, I did think it was cool. One afternoon when I came home to change clothes between jobs, I found him and a blonde girl scrambling out of our cool waterbed, which is hard to do very fast. Their slow motion scramble lasted a ridiculously long time. Long enough for me to change into my waitress uniform in the bathroom and flee down the outside staircase in my tie-up white waitress shoes. I went back for my books and the clothes I had made, but I didn't take the curtains. Virginity number 5, sex that talks to God. When I was 24, I met the man I would think of as the love of my life for an embarrassingly long time, long after we stopped seeing each other. Bob was a lot older and promised never to leave me like my father had, referring to my father's death when I was little. Bob worked in a psychoanalytically inclined mental hospital, and he talked like that. He was mustachioed too, dark Irish and a bit brooding. He wore corduroy, walked very slowly, and said very important things. I wrote poems about him, and to him, and inspired by him. He was not especially proficient sexually, but it didn't matter. What happened with Bob was of a different order entirely. When we made love, I believed that we were engaged in a deeply spiritual act. When he entered me, I thought of it as a sacrament, capital S, sacrament. Our love transcended the world and all its complications, limits, and rules. As many disappointed lovers before me have discovered, this kind of magical reality doesn't always work in the regular world. We were too wrapped up in our own little private world together, and as he might say, too regressive. We had trouble doing the normal daily things people have to do, like laundry and grocery shopping. I did finish a couple of years of graduate school when we could drag ourselves apart. We agreed that I'd move to Boston to complete my professional training, and then we would reunite and be together forever. But a couple of months into my time in Boston, he wrote that he had found someone else to be deeply connected to, which after a while was surprisingly okay. Okay. The concept of multiple virginities invites each of us to consider or choose which ones are most important in our own lives. In addition to the ones I've assigned a chapter, I reckon there are many more virginities from which to choose. Your first multiple orgasm, for example, or sex with someone of a new gender for you. Sex involving different body parts for the first time. Sex with someone different after many years when you thought you'd always be the same with the same person. Heterosexual sex with no chance of conception, say because one of you has been vasectomized or one of you is lucky enough to be postmenopausal. Sex in new places, angry sex, expensive sex, wasteful sex. The list goes on, as the virginity losses themselves can go on across a lifetime. I'm tempted now to add a sixth virginity chapter, although by definition it's not exactly a first in my life. The grace of my love life now is based on its ongoingness, precisely on its not being the first time together, or really the first anything directly sexual. In a new way, one that I hope becomes an old way, our tender histories are what make my sweetheart and me able to be ourselves and celebrate each other in our seasoned bodies and our still naked hearts.